no disrespect, but Middlesbrough ain't where it's at. And that's also not what economics is about either. It's certainly not what the human condition is about. So I wanted to write a book which actually, fundamentally, at the end of the day, expressed my frustration that nobody else would actually sit back and redraw the graphs which were taught to me in 1976, which I didn't believe about how economics should work, which are still being taught as the introductory course material, too often in too many universities in this country and elsewhere, as the basic introduction to economic theory. Now, I'm well aware, I've studied enough economics to know that a lot of those assumptions can be waived and can be varied and everything else along the way. Of course, I know that I'm being slightly stereotypical about what economics is. The trouble is that when you actually listen to the political debate in this country, and I have inadvertently become a participant in the political debate in this country, it was never my great intention to spend about a day a week on average in the Westminster Village, but I do seem to spend quite a lot of time around that place. The economics that they remember is that graph which ends up in Middlesbrough. All the rest of it, everything else about all the nuances that you could put into it for your study forever can be forgotten. They think that it's all about maximising profit. And so we come to George Osborne and his very limited understanding of the subject, which was all too apparent to anybody who listened to him today. And my belief was, and has been for a long time, that we had to have some very different graphs to explain what economics is, and so I'm sorry I sat down and started to prepare them. Ash didn't know, when he asked me to write this, that I'd never actually finished the graphs. I mean, I've been playing with them for quite a long time. But I actually wrote this book in a rather strange way, I suspect, for an economics book, because I wrote it as if it is actually a story. I mean, I started at the introduction and I ended at the end. I'm sure most people don't write economics books like that. I mean, maybe they do, but it does seem like a sort of slightly strange approach, I suspect. So it was written as a narrative, and I hope it, to some extent, reads as a narrative. Some of those who've read it say certainly it does read okay. It's written a bit in blog style. It's certainly not in standard economic literature style. If anybody's seen Paul Krugman's version of that, you'll know why that's best avoided. His blog on how to translate the King James Bible into economics is really absolutely incredible and very amusing. And certainly this is written much more in plain English than it is in economies, whatever that might be. But my aim was to simply rewrite the basic diagrams of economics so that at long last people could be presented with something different, which says some very, very different things about economics, and which I've been waiting for 35 years to be said, and got bored with waiting for someone to do, so decided it was my turn now to actually get on and do it. What do I fundamentally want to say in the book? Well, the book's in three parts, so I'll talk about the three parts. The first part is a polemic. I mean, it's very much derived from sort of my blog style. Yes, it is very clearly an argument from the political left, which is where I am. I would put myself in the middle of the Labour Party. I'm to the left of Ed Balls, I'm to the right of some members of the Shadow Treasury team, but not all of them. It seems to me I'm pretty much around that sort of area. I get on very well with Caroline Lucas and to co-author with her on the Green Party, and there's certainly a very strong green trend underlying a lot of what is in here as well. And the aim is simply to say, look, markets can work and markets can be great, and never get me wrong, I think we need markets, and I'm quite sure that we need the private sector, and I believe very strongly that it has an enormous amount of value to deliver to us. But so has the state. In fact, very much more than that. We've just been so undermining the state for so long that we end up with the extraordinary position that we have today. George Osborne announcing in Parliament, I've frozen the pay of all my employees for 3 years, and after that freeze is over, I'm going to let them have a 1% pay rise for the 2 following years, so they can have 2% over 5 years when inflation will have run at about 15% over that period. And by the way, I've also taken away 4% extra from each of them in the last 2 years to pay for extra pension costs. Therefore, I've deflated all your pay by 20%. I value what you do a lot. I'm just going to pay less, 20% less for it at the end of this Parliament than I did at the beginning. I mean, to have such contempt for the state sector is to me quite extraordinary. Because when I look around me, and I don't know whether you feel the same way, but when I look around, I think that actually a great many things in my life which have been really valuable have been done for me by the state. You know, I was born in an NHS hospital to an NHS nurse. My father worked for the nationalised electricity industry at the time, who's still paying his pension. Good on them. I was educated by the state. I was mopped up and sewn up a few times by the state as I went through my childhood scraps. I have travelled around quite a lot, care of the state. I have had all sorts of things provided. And even my right to earn my living as a chartered accountant was, let's be quite candid, and the supernormal rent that I probably earned in economic terms as a consequence was actually earned as a consequence of the monopoly power granted to chartered accountants by the state, because they gave us the right, and only us the right, to audit it, at the point when I became a chartered accountant. So the state has a fundamental role to play in many people's lives, in so many ways. And I wanted to argue that actually we have massively undervalued that, and we need to reequate the two. And so one of the things I wanted to do was tell a few stories in the book about how I see that working. And so there's a section which I know gave Ash nightmares at various moments during the course of this, which is the story of Cappuccino. Cappuccino came in and out of the book a couple of times, but I insisted it stayed in. It did actually move higher up the agenda. I mean, I wrote it at about chapter 12, and it ended up at chapter 6, I think. Cappuccino is my metaphor for the relationship between in the economy. The cup is the state. That's society, basically, and different societies have different shaped cups. Cappuccino needs its own particular shaped cup. So that's our society. Yeah, if we had a different cup, we'd end up with a latte, but we live in a cappuccino. The first thing that goes in, the foundation of the state, of our economic society, is the black coffee, and that is the state as far as I'm concerned. And then we put on that the white hot frothy milk, and that's the exciting bit that therefore attracts all the attention. Actually, that's the chocolate on the top, and that's the Sunday Times colour supplement, the froth on the top. All those things you really don't need, but you think are really important, but actually are absolutely irrelevant, which are excess consumption. David makes his appearance as a result. Got to give them a nod somewhere along the way. And so that's that. But then we have the spoon, which is democracy, which determines the mix between the coffee and the milk. We have sugar, which are the sweeteners, which make sure everybody stays broadly online with inside their society. To make sure people don't fall through the system, we have the saucer, which is, of course, the welfare system, and on we go. But what I believe is that we actually need this sort of new narrative, because the only narrative that we have at the moment within our entire storytelling about economics is private is good, profit is great, state is bad, and if you work for the state, you're a loser. And I'm sorry, I don't like that. And so I wanted to come up with a very different way of telling stories about our economics, as well as presenting some new theory. So the first part is sort of the storytelling to get us to why we need new theory. And then I get incredibly frustrated with books, and I'm sorry if any authors are here I'm going to offend, but I don't intend to. But I do get frustrated with books which end up after sort of 300 pages of analysis and say, well, that's what I think, but I'm not sure what the practical implications are, and so we'll have to work out, where this leads to next. And so unscheduled in here, and why we went over the word count, which we originally agreed was, I'm afraid, the 70-odd pages of policy, which I insisted on putting on the end. I have to say, Ash has been an incredibly accommodating publisher. Because the more words I produced at a rate of at least 5,000 a day, the more he accepted, which was very kind of him. And actually, I quite like the last bit. I actually think it's the easiest part to read by a long way. But it is my plan B. Plan A has emphatically failed today. We have had George Osborne dedicated to the idea of reducing the role of the state, cutting it down to size, doing everything he can to destroy what I think is the black coffee in our cappuccino, so that we're going to end up with a hot milk, which I have to say is one of the worst ideas I can imagine ever being presented with. And that seems to be where he's heading, and I don't want to go there, and he's going that way. So I've got 70 pages of policy which I think are how we need to actually end up with a very different economy, which rebalances the equation between the private sector and the state, which makes it symbiotic, which delivers value, which ensures, therefore, that people can actually live a balanced life. And most importantly, and this is what I define as my goal of economics, that people can achieve their potential. Because I think that is what really life here is about. That we're actually all trying to achieve our potential. Rather oddly, I had to look at the constitution of the Labour Party last night and discovered, much to my surprise, that that's how they define their goal as well now. I found that slightly worrying because Tony Blair wrote that particular clause. That's the replacement clause 4. But anyway, I did look at it last night and discovered he refers to potential in there. And I thought, well, heaven knows, Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair might be on side after all. If that's an endorsement, I'm not asking for it. But it is what I think we should be trying to help people to achieve. And to go back to Blairites, I read astonishingly that a new document came out of the Labour Party yesterday called Labour Business, and it said, we have to encourage more people to become entrepreneurial, to go into business to achieve their goals. And I thought, then you really don't understand business. And I read the CVs of those who wrote it and realised, no, they didn't. And what a sad indictment that the Labour Party now says the only way to actually achieve your potential is to go into business. Because, quite clearly, in a diversified economy made up of people of very different types, which I'm afraid to say again, economists haven't been very good at recognising, because we have very many different goals between us, and certainly not one. We need to have a multiplicity of solutions. And what I hope that I have tried to explore in here as the opening of a narrative, I don't think this is the end of a narrative, I think it's the opening of a narrative, is that there are a multiplicity of solutions inside the economy that we need to explore to come to an answer which actually will put, in the end of the day, finance back in its box, because finance is undoubtedly overblown, reduce the importance of banking, reduce the importance of the payment of interest, which I think has been extremely corrosive inside our society and has absorbed far too much of our resource, and leads instead to people doing productive things for a productive purpose, and also having quite a lot of fun on the way, which we don't value very heavily in economics, but I think we should. That's enough. Come on, someone's got a question, please.